Parabrahma Tasme Sri Gurave Namaha. Hari Om. Gananam Tva Ganapati Gammavamahe Kavim Kavi Upavashravastramam Jeshtarajam Brahmanan Brahmanaspata Anushrunnoti Visri Sadanam. Om Mahaganadipataye Namaha. Om Kimaha Om Narayana Namaha Om Madhvaya Namaha Om Govindaya Namaha Om Vishnuvaya Namaha Matsudraya Namaha Trivikramaaya Namaha Vamaraya Namaha Sridharaya Namaha Rishikeshaya Namaha Padmanabha Damodaraya Namaha Sankarshnaya Namaha Vasudevaya Namaha Pradyumnaya Namaha Niruddhaya Namaha Purushottamaya Namaha Dokshaya Namaha Narasimhaya Namaha Achyutaya Namaha Janardhanaya Namaha Upendraya Namaha Sri Krishnaya Namaha. Dear friends, we reached the 79th chapter. In the 78th chapter, we read about Lord Krishna killed Danthavakra and Viduratha, visited Vrindavana and returned to Dwaraka. It also describes how Lord Balarama killed the offensive Romaharshana Suta. Intent upon avenging the death of his friend Salva, Danthavakra appeared on the battlefield with club in the hand. Lord Krishna took up his own club and came before him. Danthavakra then insulted the Lord with harsh words and struck him a terrific blow on his head. Without budging in the slightest, Lord Krishna bludgeoned Dantavakra's chest, shattering his heart. Dantavakra had a brother named Viduratha, and he became distraught at Dantavakra's death. Taking up his sword, Viduratha confronted Sri Krishna, then visited Vrindavana for 2 months, and finally he returned to Dwaraka. Lord Krishna cut off Viduratha's head with his Sudarshana chakra, and Lord Krishna then visited Vrindavana for 2 months, and finally he returned to Dwaraka. When Lord Balarama heard that Pandavas and Kauravas were brought to go to war, in order to remain neutral, he left Dwaraka on the pretext of going on pilgrimage. The Lord bathed in the sacred places such as Prabhasa Kshetra and Tritakupa and Vishala, and eventually he came to the holy place of Naimisharanya forest, where great sages were performing an extended fire sacrifice. While being worshipped by the assembled sages and offered a seat of honor, the Lord noticed that Romaharshana, the Sutta Puranika, sitting on the speaker's seat, had failed to stand up in deference to him. Greatly angered by this offense, Lord Balarama killed Romaharshana by touching him with the tip of the blade of the Kusha grass. Here, Romaharshana, or otherwise called Sutta Puranika, has been considered by Brahma. In the Yajna, we kept one place for Brahma to sit down. So Romaharshana or Sutta Puranika has been considered as Brahma in that Yajna, so he has been placed in the Brahma seat in the Yajna procedure. But Balarama didn't know that. Balarama expected everybody has to stand up when he comes to the place where he is new to them. And he has not got up, and because of his Brahma, he thought he is not necessary to get up. The assembled sages were disturbed by what Balarama had done, and they said to him, "You have unknowingly killed a Brahmana. Therefore, even though you are above the Vedic injunctions, we request you to set a perfect example for the general population by atoning for this sin." Then Sri Balarama, following the Vedic maxim that one's son takes birth as one's own self, granted Romaharshana's son Ugrashrava the position of the speaker of the Puranas, and in accordance with the sages' desires, he promised Ugrashrava a long life with unfailing sensory capacity. Wanting to do something more for the sages, Lord Balarama promised to kill a demon named Balvala, who had been polluting their sacrificial arena. Finally, on the sages' advice, he agreed to go on a year-long pilgrimage of all the holy places in India to clear his Brahmatya dosha. This is what happened. See, the saints, great saints, assembled in Naimisharanya to do Satrayaga. Satrayaga means somebody who is doing the yajna himself is a yajmana, and he himself does everything without the assistance of other sages for conducting. That's called Satrayaga. Satrayaga is something which is special, goes on for years after years, and until they satisfy themselves that they have done enough, or they give blessings from the god, they keep on doing it. That's what's called Satrayaga. Next chapter is the 79th chapter. Balarama promised the sages in Naimisharanya that he is going to kill Balwala. Balwala is Ilwala's son, and he is a monster, he is a Rakshasa. He was on the Purnima day and Amavasya day, he used to come and trouble the sages to do the Yajna there in the Naimisharanya. This chapter describes how Lord Balarama satisfied the Brahmanas by killing Balwala, based at various holy pilgrimage sites, and attempted to dissuade Bhimasena and Duryodhana from fighting. At the sacrificial arena, the sages at Naimisharanya forest, a harsh wind began to blow on the new moon day, spreading the obnoxious smell of pus and obscuring everything with dust. The demon Balwala then appeared there with a trident in his hand, his massive body pitch black and his face very frightening. Lord Balarama caught the demon with his blow and then struck him ferocious blow on the head with his club, killing him. The sages chanted Lord Balarama's glories and presented him with lavish gift. Lord Balarama then began his pilgrimage, during which he visited many holy tirthas. When he heard news of the battle between the Kurus and Pandavas, the Lord Balarama went to Kurukshetra to try to stop the duel between Bhima and Duryodhana, but he could not dissuade them because from fighting so deep was their enmity. Understanding that the fight was the arrangement of the fate, Lord Balarama left the battlefield and returned to Dwaraka. Sometime later, Balarama again went to Naimisharanya forest, where the sages performed a number of yajnas on his behalf. Lord Balarama reciprocated by granting the sages transcendental knowledge and revealing them his eternal identity. The next chapter is 80th chapter, in which Lord Krishna gives a big welcome to Sudhama. This chapter relates how Lord Krishna worshipped his Brahmana friend Sudhama, who came to his palace seeking charity, and how the two of them discussed the pastimes they had shared while living at the home of their own spiritual master, Sandipana Muni. The Brahmana Sudhama, a personal friend of Lord Krishna, was completely free of material desires. He maintained himself and his wife with whatever came of its own accord, and thus they were poverty stricken. One day, Sudama's wife, unable to find any food to prepare for her husband, went to him and asked that he visit his friend Krishna in Dwaraka and beg some charity. Sudama was reluctant, but when she persisted, he agreed to go, reflecting that an opportunity to see the Lord was extremely auspicious. His wife begged a few handfuls of flattened rice, avalaki, as a gift for Sri Krishna, and Sudama set off for Dwaraka. As Sudama approached the palace of Lord Krishna's principal wife, Rukmini Devi, the Lord saw him from the distance. Krishna immediately rose from his seat on Rukmini's bed and embraced his friend with great joy. Then he sat Sudama down on the bed, washed his feet with his own hands, and sprinkled the water on his head. After this, he presented him with various gifts and worshipped him with incense, lamps, and so on. Meanwhile, Rukmini found the shabbily dressed Brahmana with a yoktail whisk. All of these astonished the residents of the palace. Lord Sri Krishna then took the hand of his friend, and the two of them reminisced about the things they had done together long ago while living in the school of their spiritual master Sandipani Muni. Sudama pointed out that Krishna engages in the pastime of acquiring an education only to set an example for human society. So this 80th chapter is showing the Lord Krishna's welcoming Sudama. Start with the sloka Raja Uvacha Bhagavanyani Chanyani Mukundasya Mahatmanaha Viryenananta Viryasya Shrutumichamahe Prabhu. So Parikshit Maharaja is telling, my Lord, O Master, I wish to hear about other various valorous deeds performed by the Supreme Person of Godhead Mukunda, whose valor is unlimited. Kunu Shutas Chakrad Brahmato Shlokta Satyata Virameta Visheshajno Vishinya Kama Marganai. O Brahmana, how could anyone who knows the essence of life and is disgusted with enduring for sense gratification give up the transcendental topics of Lord Uttama Shloka after hearing them repeatedly? Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti comments herein we see many persons who, even after hearing the topics of the Lord repeatedly, give up their spiritual dedication. The Acharya replies that the word Visarajna is therefore significant here. Those who have actually understood the essence of life do not give up Krishna consciousness. A further qualification is to be Vishanna Kama Marganaya. Disgusted with material sense gratification, these two qualities are complementary. One who has experienced the real taste of Krishna consciousness automatically becomes disgusted with the inferior taste of material pleasure. Such a genuine hearer of topics of Krishna cannot give up hearing about the Lord's fascinating pastimes. Actual speech is that which describes the qualities of the Lord. Real hands are those that work for him. A true mind is that which always remembers him, dwelling within everything, moving and non-moving. And actual ears are those that listen to the sanctifying topics about him. While continuing from the previous verse to glorify the sense of hearing dedicated to the Lord Krishna, King Parikshit mentions the other senses also, so that we gain a complete picture of Krishna consciousness. Here, he declares that without any connection to Krishna, the Supreme Lord, all the organs of the body became useless. Similarly, a similar statement is made by Shaunaka Rishi in the second canto, third chapter, verses 20 to 24. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti mentions that the senses should work together in Krishna consciousness. In other words, whatever the eyes or the ears experience, the mind should simply remember Krishna, who is within all things. An actual head is one that goes down to the Lord in his manifestations among the moving and non-moving creatures. Real eyes are those that see only the Lord, and actual limbs are those which really regularly honor the water that must bathe the Lord's feet, or those of his fullness. Sutta Uvacha, text number 5. Vishnuratena samrusto Bhagavan Badarayini Vasudeve Bhagavati Nimagna Hridayo Bravit. Nimagna Hridayo Bhavit. Suta Goswami said, Suta Maharshi, thus questioned by King Vishnuratha, the powerful sage Badarayini replied, his heart full absorbed in meditation on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva. Sukadeva Goswami continued, Lord Krishna had a certain Brahmana friend named Sudhama, who was most learned in Vedic knowledge and detached from all sense enjoyment. Furthermore, his mind was peaceful and his senses subdued. Living as a householder, he maintained himself with whatever came its own accord. The wife of that poorly dressed Brahmana suffered along with him and was emaciated from hunger. Sudama's chaste wife was also poorly dressed, and whatever food she obtained, she gave it to her husband. Thus, she remained fatigued from hunger. The chaste wife of the Sudama, poverty-stricken Brahmana, once approached him. Here, her face dried up because of her distress. Trembling with fear, she spoke to the Sudama as follows. According to Sridhara Swami, a chaste lady was especially unhappy because she could not obtain food to feed her husband. Further, she was fearful to approach her husband because she knew that he did not want to beg for anything other than devotion to the Supreme Lord. Sudama's wife said, O Brahmana, is not it true that the husband of the goddess of fortune is the personal friend of your exalted self, that greatest Yadavas? The Supreme Lord Krishna is compassionate to Brahmanas and very willing to grant them his shelter. Sri Vishwanatha Chakravarti explains in his commentary how the Brahmana's wife anticipated every possible objection for her husband might make to her request that he go to Lord Krishna to beg charity. If the Brahmana might say, how could the husband of the goddess of fortune befriend a fallen soul like myself? She replies by saying that Lord Krishna is Brahmanya, very favorably disposed towards Brahmanas. If Sudama might claim to have no real devotion for the Lord, she replies by saying that he is a great and wise personality and who would surely obtain the shelter and mercy of the Lord. If the unhappy conditioned souls suffering the fruits of their own karma, she replies that Lord Krishna is especially the Lord of the devotees, and thus, even if he himself did not grant Sudama his mercy, certainly the devotees engaged in serving the Lord would mercifully give them charity, since the Lord protects the Sattvatas, the members of the Edu dynasty. What difficulty would there be for him to protect a humble Brahmana like Sudama, and what fault would there be in his doing so? O fortunate one, please approach Lord Krishna the real shelter of all saints. He will certainly give abundant wealth to such a suffering householder as you. Lord Krishna is now the ruler of Bhojas, Vrishnis, and Andakas, and is staying at Dwaraka since Dwaraka his lotus feet. What doubt is there that he, the spiritual master of the universe, will bestow upon his sincere worshipper prosperity and material enjoyment, which are not even very desirable? The Brahmana's wife here implies that since Lord Krishna is the ruler of the Bhojas, Vrishnis, and Andakas, if these opulent rulers merely acknowledged Sudama as a personal friend of Krishna, they could give him everything they required, everything he required. In this connection, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti comments that since Lord Krishna had at this point but aside his weapons, he no longer traveled outside his own capital Dwaraka. Thus, his own capital of Dwaraka. Thus, Srila Prabhupada writes in Krishna, the Supreme Personal Godhead, the Brahmana's wife said, I have heard that he never leaves his capital city, Dwaraka. He is living there without outside engagement. As mentioned here, material wealth and sense gratification are not very desirable. The reason for this is that in the long run, they give no real satisfaction. Still, Sudama's wife thought even if Sudama went to Dwaraka and simply remained silent before the Lord, he would certainly give him abundant wealth as well as shelter to his own lotus feet, which was Sudama's real objective. Shuka Maharshi said, when his wife thus repeatedly implored him in various ways, the Brahmana thought to himself, to see Lord Krishna is indeed the greatest achievement in life. Thus he decided to go, but first he did not. But first he told her, my good wife, if there is anything on the house, I can bring a gift. Sudama was naturally humble, and thus, although at first he was dissatisfied with his wife's proposal, finally he settled his mind and decided to go. Now the last detail was that he had to take a gift for his friend. Sudama's wife begged 4 handfuls of flat rice, avalaki, from neighboring brahmanas, tied up the rice in a torn piece of cloth, and give it to her husband as a present for Lord Krishna. Taking the flat rice, the saintly Brahmana Sudama set off for Dwaraka, all the while wondering how will I be able to have Krishna's audience? Among other things, Sudama assumed that gatekeepers would stop him. त्रीणि गुल्मानीत्याय त्रिस्तः कक्षाश्च सद्विजः विप्रोगम्यान्दकृष्णीनां गृहेष्ट चतुर्धर्मिणीं गृहेष्टच्युतधर्मिणाम् गृहं दृष्ट्वा सहस्राणां महिषाणां हरे द्विजः विवेशैकतं श्रीमद्ब्रह्मानन्दं गतो यतः. The learned Brahmana, joined by some local Brahmanas, passed 3 guard stations and went through 3 gateways, and then he walked by the homes of Lord Krishna's faithful devotees, the Andakas and Vrishnis, which ordinarily no one could do. He then entered one with opulent palaces belonging to Lord Hari's 16,000 queens, and when he did so, he felt as if were attaining the bliss of Lord Hari's 16,000 wives, and when he did so, he felt as if he were attaining the bliss of liberation. When the saintly Brahmana entered the precincts of Lord Krishna's palaces in Dwaraka and then actually entered one of his palaces, he completely forgot everything else. And thus, his state of mind is compared to that of one who has just achieved the bliss of a spiritual liberation. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti quotes from the Padma Purana Uttara Kanda, wherein we learned that the Brahmana actually entered the palace of Rukmini. Satu Rukminya Antaha Pura Dwari Kshanamam Tusam Sitaha. He stood for a moment in silence at the doorway of the Queen Rukmini's palace. Tam vilokyachuto dhurat priya paryankamacchatah sasottaya chabhyeta dorbam paryagruhin mada. At that time, Lord Achyuta was seated on his consort bed. Spotting the Brahmana at some distance, the Lord immediately stood up, went forward to meet him, and with great pleasure embraced him. In this situation, before Lord Krishna coming, Sudhama sends a nice song. That song is very popular now. The lotus-eyed Supreme Lord felt intense ecstasy upon touching the body of his dear friend, the wise Brahmana, and thus he shed tears of love. Lord Krishna seated his friend Sudhama upon the bed. Then the Lord, who purifies the whole world, personally offered him his various tokens of respect and washed his feet. O king, after which he sprinkled the water on his own head. He anointed him with divinely fragrant sandalwood, aguru, and kumkuma paste, and happily worshipped him with aromatics, incense, and arrays of. After finally offering him a betel nut and a gift of a cow, he welcomed him with pleasing words. By fanning him with her camera, the divine goddess of fortune personally served the poor Brahmana whose clothing was torn and dirty and who was so thin that veins are visible all over his body. Antapuranjano drushta Krishnenamala kirtana vismito budati pritya avadutam sabajitam. The people in the royal palace here astonished to see Krishna, the Lord's spotless glory, so lovingly honored this shabbily dressed Brahmana. The residents of the palace said, "What pious acts was this unkempt, impoverished Brahmana performed?" People regarded him as a loyal and contemptible at the spiritual master of the three worlds, the abode of goddess Sri. He is serving him reverently, leaving the goddess of fortune sitting on her bed. The Lord has embraced this Brahmana as if he were an older brother. Katayam chakra durghata purva gurukule sato atmano leta rajan karo grukhya parasparam. Sri Bhagavan Vacha. Shuka Maharshi said, taking each other's hands, O King Krishna and Sudhama talked pleasantly about how they once lived together in the school of their guru. Text 28. Sri Bhagavan Vacha Api Brahman Gurukulat Bhavata Labda Dakshinat Samavrattena Dharmajya Bharyo Rasadrishina Va. Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna said, "My dear Brahmana, you have well the ways of Dharma. After you offered a gift of remuneration to our Guru and returned home after his school, did you marry a compatible wife or not? Among civilized human beings, the question of ashrama, spiritual border, spiritual order, he inquired if his friend had been properly married and was executing the duties of the household life. Since he was not dressed as a renunciant, he could. Since Lord Krishna could see that Brahmana was poorly dressed, he inquired his friend had been properly married and was executing the duties of the household. Since he was not dressed as a renunciant, he would be without a suitable ashrama unless he was properly married. Shloka number 29. Prayo gruheshate chittamākāma vihitam tata naivati priyase vidvandaneshu viditam ome viditam heme. Even though you are mostly involved in household affairs, your mind is not affected by material desires. Nor, O learned one, do you take much pleasure in the pursuit of material wealth. This I am well. O learned one, do you take much pleasure in the pursuit of material wealth? This I am well aware of. Lord Krishna here reveals that in fact he was well aware of his friend's situation. Having renounced all material propensities which spring from Lord's illusionary energy, some people execute worldly duties with their minds. Undisturbed by mundane desires, they act as I do to instruct the general population. We came to this Shloka 31. Kachit Gurukule Vasam Brahman Smarisinayata Vijo Vidyaya Vidyayam Tapasa Paramuchyate Tapasa Paramushnate. My dear Brahmana, do you remember how we lived together in our spiritual master school, when a twice born student has learned from his guru all that is to be related? He can enjoy spiritual life, which lies beyond all ignorance. Savai Satkarmana Saksha Vijateriya Sambhava Adyonga Yatra Shramina Yataham Jnanado Guruhu. My dear friend, he gives a person his physical birth is his first important. But the person who bestows transcendental knowledge like Krishna upon the members of his devotees of all the spiritual orders of society is one's ultimately spiritual master. Indeed, is as good as my own self. Certainly, O Brahmana, of all the followers of Varnashrama Dharma system, those who took advantage of the words, I speak in my form as the spiritual master, and thus easily cross over the ocean of material existence, best understand their own true welfare. I, the soul of all beings, am not satisfied by ritual worship, Brahmanical initiation, penances of self-discipline. I am faithful service rendered to one spiritual master. The word prarijata here indicates either begetting good children, on the other hand, the word prajati here indicates that either begetting and good children or the second birth obtained by ritual initiation into Vedic culture. Although both of these are praiseworthy, Lord Krishna here states that faithful service rendered to a bona fide spiritual master is still higher. Apina smaryate brahma nakshatram nivasata guru gurudva gururarais choditana nindanayane vrajito. Oh Brahmana, do you remember what happened to us while we are living with our spiritual master? Once our guru's wife sent us to fetch firewood, and after that we enter the Once our guru's wife sent us to fetch firewood, and after that we entered the vast forest. O twice born one, can unseasonal storm rose with fierce wind and rain and harsh thunder. So they were stuck, both Lord Krishna and the Sudhama, both were students in the ashrama, and Guru's wife went us to fetch firewood, and after we entered the vast forest, a twice born one, an unseasonal storm arose with a fierce wind and rain and harsh thunder. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti explains that this storm arose during the winter and was therefore unseasonal. Then, as the sun set, the forest was covered by darkness in every direction, and with all the flooding, we could not distinguish high land from low. Constantly besieged by the powerful wind and rain, we lost our way amongst the flooding waters. We simply held each other's hands and in great distress wandered aimlessly about the forest. Srila Sudhama Swami points out that the verb paribhabrama may be understood to be the prefix pari with either of the verb bir brahm. In the case of brahm, it indicates that Krishna and Sudhama wandered all about, and in the case of bhar, which means to carry, it indicates that as the two young boys wandered about, they continued to carry the firewood they had secured for their spiritual master. Etadvidatma buditeravo sandeepanir guruhu anveshanoni shishyana chaurya ashutaha. Acharya Pashudhaturan. Our Guru Sandipani Muni, understanding our predicament, set out after sunrise to search for us, his disciples, and found us in distress. Sandipani Muni said, O my children, you have suffered so much for my sake. The body is most dear to every living creature, but you are so dedicated to me that you completely disregarded your own comfort. एतदेव हि सचिष्टे कर्तव्यं गुरुनिष्ठितं यद्वै विशुद्धभावेन सर्वार्थात्मर्पणं गुरु. This indeed is the duty of all true disciples in the ashrama, to repay the debt to their spiritual master by offering him with pure hearts their wealth and even their very lives. One engages one's body to realize one's purposes. The body is also the basis of the material conception of I, while one's fortune is the basis of the conception of mind. Thus, by offering everything to the spiritual master, one realizes oneself to be an eternal servant of the Lord. The spiritual master does not exploit the disciple, but rather engages him fully in Krishna consciousness for the disciple's eternal benefit. The spiritual master does not exploit the disciple, but rather engages him fully in Krishna consciousness for the disciple's eternal benefit. You boys are first-class Brahmanas, and I am satisfied with you both. May all your desires be fulfilled, and may the Vedic mantras you have learned never lose their meaning for you in this world or the next. Cooked food left sitting for 3 hours is called yathayama, indicating that it has lost its taste. And similarly, if a devotee does not remain fixed in Krishna consciousness, the transcendental knowledge that once inspired him on the spiritual path will lose its taste or meaning of him. Thus, Sandipani Muni blesses his disciple that the Vedic mantras, which reveal the absolute truth, will never lose their meaning for them, but will remain ever fresh in their minds. Ittam vidannenekani vasatam guruveshmasu guruраnugrahanaiva pramanurna prashantaye. Lord Krishna continued, we had many similar experiences while living in a spiritual master's home. Simply by the grace of the spiritual master, a person can fulfill life purpose and attain eternal praise. Now, the Brahmana Uvacha Kimasmabhiranivrittam Deva Deva Jagadguru Bhavata Satya Kamena Yesham Vaso Guru Abhut. Guru Abhut. The Brahmana said, what could I possibly have failed to achieve? O Lord of Lords, O universal teacher, since I was able to personally live with you, whose every desire is fulfilled at the home of our spiritual master. Sudhama Brahmana wisely understands his extraordinary good fortune of having lived with Sri Krishna at the residence of their spiritual master Sandipani Muni. Thus, whatever external difficulties they experienced were actually an expression of the Lord's mercy to teach the importance of service to the spiritual master. Srila Prabhupada renders the learned Brahmana's feelings as follows. Sudhama said, my dear Krishna, you are the Supreme Lord and the Supreme Spiritual Master of everyone. And since I was fortunate enough to live with you in the house of our Guru, I think I have nothing more to do in the matter of the prescribed Vedic duties. Yasya chandomayam brahma deha avapanam vibho shreyasam tasya gurusha vasonthyanta vidambanam. O Almighty Lord, your body comprises the absolute truth in the form of the Vedas and is thus the source of all auspicious goals of life. That you took up residence at the school of a spiritual master is simply one of your pastimes in which you play the role of the human being. Thus end the purports of the humble servants of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, to the 10th canto, 80th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavat Puranam, entitled the Brahmana Sudhama visited Lord Krishna in Dwaraka. Iti Srimad Bhagavate Mahapurane Paramahamsam Samhita Dashamaskande Uttararde Sri Sudhama Charite Atitomodyaya. In the next chapter, 81st chapter, Sudhama gets a lot of wealth. The Lord blesses Sudhama Brahmana. In this chapter, 81 chapter, Lord Krishna ate a morsel of the flat rice brought by his friend Sudhama and bestowed upon him wealth greater than that of the king of the heaven. In the course of his loving talks with his friend Sudhama, Lord Krishna said, "My dear Brahmana, have you brought any gift for me from your house? I regard as very significant, even though smallest offering from my loving devotee." But the poor Brahmana was ashamed to present Krishna with the meager gift of flat rice. However, since Lord Krishna is the super soul dwelling in all our hearts, he knew why Sudama had coming to his fame, coming to him, visit him. So he grabbed the bundle of flat rice of Sudama was hiding and ate a handful of it with great pleasure. He was about to eat a second morsel when Rukmani Devi stopped him. Feeling as if he had gone back to Godhead, Sudama spent that night comfortably in Lord Krishna's palace, and the next morning he set off for his home back journey. As he passed along the highway, he thought of how fortunate he was to have been so honored by Sri Krishna. Absorbed in this meditation, Sudama arrived at the place where his home used to be, and he was struck with great wonder. Instead of his broken down house, he saw a series of opulent palaces. While he stood astonished, a group of beautiful men and women came forward to greet him with singing and music. The Brahmana's wife, wonderfully adorned with celestial jewelry, came out of the palace and welcomed him with a great love and reverence. Sudama entered his home together with her, thinking that this extraordinary transformation must have been due to Supreme Lord Krishna's mercy on him. From then, the Sudama lived his life amidst lavish wealth, yet he maintained his mode of detachment and constantly chanted the glories of Lord Krishna. In a short time, he broke off all bonds of bodily attachment and attained to the kingdom of God. So the 81st chapter starts with Shukavacha. Shukavacha sa ittam vijamukena sa sankatayan harihi sarvabhuta manobhidya swayamana udatacham uvachatam. This is the first sloka of the 81st chapter of Dashamaskanda. Brahmanyo Brahmanam Krishna Bhagavan Sprahasanniyam Premna Nirikshane Neva Prekshan Kalusatangatihi. Shuka Maharshi is saying to Parikshit Raj, Lord Hari Krishna perfectly knows the hearts of all living beings, and he is especially devoted to the Brahmanas, while the Supreme Lord, the goal of all saintly persons, conversed in this way with the best of the twice born. He laughed and spoke the following words to that dear friend of his, the Brahmana Sudama, all the while smiling and looking upon him with affection. According to Sri Rasidhara Swami, the words of Sarvabhuta Mano Vidya indicates that since Lord Krishna knows the minds of everyone, he could tell at once that his friend Sudama had brought some flat rice for him and was ashamed to present it. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti's further explanation of this verse, Lord Krishna smiled at this moment, thinking, yes, I am going to make you show what you brought for me. His smile then turned to laughter as he thought, how long are you going to keep this precious gift hidden in your cloth? Krishna glanced toward the bundle hidden inside his friend's garment, telling Sudama by his loving glance, the veins showing through your emaciated skin and your ragged clothes astonish everyone present. But these symptoms of poverty will last only until tomorrow's morning. Although Lord Krishna is Bhagavan, the Supreme Independent Lord, he is always pleased to reciprocate when Although Lord Krishna is a Bhagavan, the Supreme Independent Lord, he is always pleased to reciprocate with those who are priya to him, his cherished servants, as the indulgent patron of the Brahmana class. He especially enjoys favoring Brahmanas who are additionally qualified by unconditional devotion to him. Bhagavanuvacha kimupayanamanitam brahman me bhavata grahat anmupya prapavratam bhakte premna bhurye me bhavet bhurya prabhuttopyahardham na me toshaya kalpate. Supreme Lord Krishna said, O Brahmana, what gift have you brought me? From whom? I regard as great even the smallest gift offered by my devotees in pure love, but even great offerings presented by the non-devotees do not please me. Text 4. Patram pushpam palam toyam eme bhakta prayachati tadaham bhakta prahrtamashnami prayatatmanaha. If one offers me with love and devotion a leaf, a flower, a fruit, or water, I will accept it. These famous words are spoken by the Lord in Bhagavad Gita, 9 chapter 26 sloka. The translation and word meanings here are taken from Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita as it is. In the context of the current episode of Sudhama's visit, Dwaraka, Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti has kindly continued his explanation of Lord Krishna's statements. This verse is a reply to Sudhama's anxiety that his bringing such an unfit offering was ill-considered. The use of the words bhaktya prayachati and bhaktya upaharatam may seem redundant since they both mean offered with devotion. But bhaktya can indicate how the Lord reciprocates the devotional mood of whoever offers him something with love. In other words, Lord Krishna here declares that his reciprocation in a pure loving exchange is not dependent on the external quality of what is offered. Krishna says something may or may not be impressive and pleasing in its own right, but when my devotee offers it to me in devotion with the expectation that some I will enjoy, and it gives me great pleasure. In this regard, I make no discrimination. The verb asnami, I eat, implies that Lord Krishna eats even a flower which is supposed to be smelled, bewildered, as he is by the ecstatic love he feels for his devotee. Someone might then question the Lord. So will you refuse an offering made to you by a devotee of some other deity? The Lord answers, yes, I will refuse to eat it. The Lord answers, yes, I will refuse to eat. This the Lord states by the phrase prayatatmanaha, implying only by devotion service to me can one become pure-hearted. Shukamarshi is continued, even after being addressed in this way, O king, the Brahmana felt too embarrassed to offer his palmful of flat rice to the husband of goddess of fortune. He simply kept his head bowed in shame. Being the direct witness in the hearts of all living beings, Lord Krishna fully understands why Sudhama had come to see him. Thus he thought, in the past, my friend has never worshipped me out of a desire for material opulence. But now he comes to me to satisfy his chaste and beloved wife. I will give him richness that even the immortal demigods cannot obtain. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti comments that the Lord momentarily wondered, how has it come about, despite my omniscience, that this devotee of mine has fallen into such a poverty? Then quickly understanding the situation, he spoke to himself the words related to in other verse. But someone may point out that Sudhama should not have been so poverty-stricken, since appropriate enjoyment comes as a boy produced by Sudhama should not have been so poverty-stricken, since appropriate enjoyment comes as a byproduct of service to God. Even for a devotee who has no utter motives. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita also. But those who always worship me with exclusive devotion, meditating on my transcendental form, to them I carry out, they carry out what they lack, and I preserve what they want. In response to this point, a distinction must be made between the two kinds renounced devotees. One kind is inimical to sense gratification, and the other one is indifferent to it. The Supreme Lord does not force sense gratification upon the devotee who is extremely adverse. The Supreme Lord does not force sense gratification upon the devotee who is extremely averse to worldly enjoyments. This is seen among such great renouncers as Jadabharata. On the other hand, the Lord may give limitless wealth and power to a devotee who is neither repelled nor attracted by material things, such as Prahalada Maharaja. Up to this point in his life, Sudhama Brahmana was totally averse to the sense gratification, but no, out of compassion for his faithful wife, and also because he hankered to have Krishna's audience, he went to beg from the Lord. Thinking like this, the Lord snatched from the Brahmana's garment the grains of flat rice tied up in an old piece of cloth and exclaimed, "What is this? My friend, have you brought this for me? It gives me extreme pleasure. Indeed, these few grains of flat rice will satisfy not only me, but also the entire universe." After saying this, the Supreme Lord ate one palmful and was about to eat a second when the devoted goddess Rukmini took hold of his hand. Queen Rukmini took hold of Krishna's hand to prevent him from eating any more of the flat rice. According to Sri Pada Sridhara Swami, with his gesture, she meant to tell the Lord, "This much of your grace is sufficient to assure anyone vast riches, which are merely the play of my glance. But please do not force me to surrender myself to this Brahmana, as will happen if you eat one more handful." Queen Rukmini said, "This is more than enough, O soul of the universe, to secure him an abundance of all kinds of wealth in this world and the next. After all, one's prosperity depends simply on your satisfaction." Shukadeva Goswami continued, "The Brahmana spent that night in the Lord Krishna's palace. After eating and drinking to his full satisfaction, he felt as if he had gone to the spiritual world." Shobate Vishwabhavena Swasukena Vimanditaha Jagama Swalayam Tata Pratyunna Vrijjananditaha. The next day, Sudhama set off for home while being honored by Lord Krishna, the self-satisfied maintainer of the universe. The Brahmana felt greatly delighted, "My dear king," as he walked along the road. We are here reminded that Lord Krishna maintains the supply of desirable objects for the whole universe. Therefore, it is to be understood that he was about to manifest for Sudhama opulence greater than Indra's. Being Swasukha, perfectly complete in his own bliss, the Lord has an unlimited capacity for bestowing gifts. According to Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakura, the word Abhivandita According to Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakura, the word Abhivandita indicates that Lord Sri Krishna, accompanied by Sudhama on the road for a short distance, and finally parted with Brahmana after bowing down to him and speaking some respectful words. Although he had apparently received no wealth from Lord Krishna, Sudhama was too shy to beg for it on his own. He simply returned home, feeling perfectly satisfied to have had Although he had apparently received no wealth from Lord Krishna, Sudhama was too shy to beg for it on his own. He simply returned home, feeling perfectly satisfied to have had the Supreme Lord's audience. Aho Brahmanya Devasya Drushta Brahmanya Tamaya Yuddha Yuddharidrato Maha Lakshmi Mahashtishto Bibrato Rasi. Sudhama thought Lord Krishna is known to be devoted to the Brahmanas, and now I have personally seen this devotion. Indeed, he who carries the goddess of fortune on his chest was embraced. He who carries the goddess of fortune in his chest has embraced the poorest beggar. Kwaham daridra papeyan kwa Krishna Sriniketanah Brahma banduriti swaham bahubhyam parirambitaha. Who am I? A sinful poor friend of Brahmana. And who is Krishna? The Supreme Personality of Godhead, full in 6 opulences. Nonetheless, he has embraced me with his 2 arms. This translation is from Srila Prabhupada, the understanding of Chaitanya Charitamrita. Sudhama was so humble that he considered his poverty to be his own fault, a result of sin. The translation is from Srila Prabhupada's English rendering of Chaitanya Charitamrita. Sudhama was so humble that he considered his poverty to be his own fault, a result of a sin. Such a mentality is in accord with the saying, Daridra Dosha Guna Rashi Nashi. The discrepancy of being poor ruins heaps of good qualities. He treated me just like one of his brothers, making me sit on his bed of his beloved consort. And because I was fatigued, his queen personally fanned me with a yak-tail camera. Although he is the Lord of all gods and the object of worship for all Brahmanas, he worshipped me as if I were a demigod myself. Although he is the Lord of all demigods and the object of worship for all Brahmanas, he worshipped me as if I were a god myself, massaging my feet and rendering other humble services. Devotional service to his lotus feet is the root cause of all the perfections a person can find in heaven, in liberation, in the subterranean regions, and on the earth. Thinking, if this poor wretch suddenly becomes rich, he will forget me in his intoxicating happiness. The compassionate Lord did not grant me even a little wealth. Sudhama's statement that Lord Krishna bestowed on him not even a little wealth, he may also be taken to mean that instead of giving him wealth that was abhuri, slight, the Lord in fact gave him the immense treasure of his association. This alternate meaning has been suggested by Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti. Thinking thus to himself, Sudhama finally came to the place where his home stood. But that place was now crowded on all sides with towering celestial palaces, rivaling the combined brilliance of the sun, fire, and the moon. There were splendors, courtyards, and gardens, each filled with flocks of coming birds and beautified by ponds in which Kumuda, Amboja, Kalahara, and Utpala lotuses grew. Finally, attired men and Sudhama wondered, what is all this? Whose property is it? How has this all come about? Srila Sridhara Swami gives the sequence of the Brahmana's thoughts. First, seeing a great unfamiliar effulgency, he thought, "What is this?" Then nothing. Then noting the palaces, he asked himself, "Whose place is this?" And recognizing it as his own, he wondered, how has it become so transformed? Evam mimamsa amanamtaha. एवं मिमां समानं तं नरनार्यो मनप्रवाह प्रत्यगृह्णा महाभागः गीताव्याद्येन भूयसा. As he continued to ponder in this way, the beautiful men and maidservants, as effulgent as demigods, came forward to greet their greatly fortunate master with loud song and instrumental music. As explained by Acharya Vishwanath Chakravarti, the word Pratyagranam, they acknowledge in turn, indicates that first Sudama accepted the servants within his mind, deciding to First, Sudama accepted the servants within his mind, deciding, "My Lord must want me to have them." And in response to the visible change in his attitude, they approached him as their master. When she heard that her husband had arrived, the Brahmana's wife quickly came out of the house in a jubilant fury. She resembled the goddess of fortune herself, emerging from her divine abode. Srila Sridhara Swami points out that since Lord Krishna had turned Sudama's home into a heavenly abode, everyone living there now possessed beautiful bodies and attire appropriate to the residents of heaven. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti adds this insight. The night before, Sudama's poor emaciated wife had been sleeping in a rags under a crumbling roof, but when she woke up in the morning, she found herself and her house wonderfully changed. Only for a moment was she confused. She then realized that this opulence was the Lord's gift to her husband, who must be on his way home. Thus, she prepared to greet him. When the chaste lady, Sudama's wife, saw her husband, her eyes filled with tears of love and eagerness. As she held her eyes closed, she solemnly bowed down to him, and in her heart she embraced him. Sudama was amazed to see his wife shining forth in the midst of the maidservants adorned with jeweled lockets. She looked as effulgent as a goddess in her celestial aeroplane. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti explains that up to now the Supreme Lord had kept the Brahmana in his wretched state so that his wife could recognize him. With pleasure, he took his wife with him and entered his house, where there were hundreds of gems studded pillars, just as in the palace of Lord Mahendra. The word Pritaha here indicates that these changes gave him considerable pleasure. The famous thousands names of Vishnu, hymn of Mahabharata, immortalizes Sudama's sudden opulence in the following phrase: Sridhamara Anka Bhaktirata Bhumi Antendra Vaibhavam. Lord Vishnu is also known as Krishna, he who brought Indra's opulence to this earth for the benefit of his pitiful devotee Sridhama or Sudama. In Sudama's home were beds as soft and white as the foam of milk, with bedsteads made of ivory and ornamented with gold. There were also coaches with golden legs, as well as the royal camera fans, golden thrones, soft cushions, and gleaming canopies hung with a string of pearls. Upon the walls of sparkling crystal glass inlaid with the precious emeralds shone jeweled lamps, and the women in the palace were all adorned with precious gems. As he viewed this luxurious opulence of all varieties, the Brahmana calmly reasoned to himself about his unexpected prosperity. Sudhama never expected prosperity like that. Sudhama thought, I have always been poor. Certainly, the only possible way that such an unfortunate person as myself could become suddenly rich is that Lord Krishna, his blessings, the supremely opulent chief of Yadu dynasty, has glanced upon me. After all, my friend Krishna, the most exalted of Dasharas and the enjoyer of unlimited wealth, noticed that I secretly intended to beg from him. Thus, even though he said nothing about it, when I stood before him, he actually bestowed upon me the most abundant riches. In this way, he acted just like a merciful rain cloud. Sri Krishna is Bhuri Bhuja, the unlimited enjoyer. He did not tell Sudama how he was going to fulfill his unspoken request. Because of, according to Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti, he was thinking at the time, my dear friend has given me those grains of rice which are greater than all the pleasures I own. Even though in his own house he had no such gift to bring me, he took the trouble of begging it from a neighbor. Therefore, it is only proper that I gave him something more valuable than all my possessions. Embarrassed at being unable to properly reciprocate his devotees' offering, Lord Krishna bestowed his favor on the Brahmana silently. The Lord acted just like a magnanimous rain cloud, which provides the necessities of life for everyone near and far, but feels ashamed that its main rain is too insignificant a gift to give him return for the abundant offerings that farmers make it to it. Out of shame, the cloud may wait until night time when the farmers are asleep before watering their fields. The chiefs of the Lord Krishna is identified in this verse were specially renowned for their generosity. Kinchit karot parvapi yattadattam sukrutattam suhratkritam palgapi bhurikari mayopanitam pratakamamustim pratigrahit pratiyatpo mahatma. The Lord considers even his greatest benedictions to be insignificant, while he magnifies even small service rendered to him by his well-wishing devotee. Thus, with pleasure, the Supreme Soul accepted a single palmful of the flat rice I brought to him. Taskaiva me savrde sakya maitri dasyam punarjanmani janmani syat mahanubhavena gunalayena vishnu jattas purusha pandangaha. The Lord is the supremely compassionate reservoir of all transcendental qualities. Life after life, may I serve him with love and friendship and sympathy, and may I cultivate such firm attachment for him by the precious association of his devotees. As explained by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti, Savrudam here signifies affection towards him, which is his devotees. Sakyam is affinity manifested in desire to live in his own company. Maitri is the attitude of intimate comradeship, and Dasyam is the urge to service. Bhaktaya Chitra Bhagavan hi Sampado Rajyam Vibhutirno Samartaya Tyajaha Samartayatyajaha Adirga Bodhaya Vichakshana Swayam Pashnani Patam Dhanindha Madodbhavam. To a devotee who lacks spiritual insight, Supreme Lord will not grant that wonderful opulences of this world, kingly power of material assets. Indeed, in his infinite wisdom, the unborn Lord well knows how the intoxication of pride can cause the downfall of the wealthy. As explained by Sri Vishwanatha Chakravarti, the humble Brahmana Sudhama considered himself unworthy of the Supreme Lord's most rare and valuable benediction, pure devotional service. He reasoned that if he had any true devotion, the Lord would have granted him perfect, unflinching devotion rather than the material riches and servants he had received. Lord Krishna would have protected a more serious devotee by denying him such distinction or distractions. The Lord, the Lord will give a silence. The Lord would give granted him perfect, unflinching devotion rather than material riches and servants he had received. Lord Krishna would have protected a more serious devotee by denying him such distractions. The Lord will give a sincere but less intelligent devotee not as much material wealth as he desires, but only what will promote his devotional progress. Sudhama might. Sudhama thought a great saint like Prahalad Maharaj can avoid becoming contaminated by immeasurable wealth, power, and fame. But I must always be wary of temptation in my own situation. We may understand that this humble attitude assured Sudama Vipra final success in his execution of Bhakti Yoga by the standard process of hearing and repeating the glories of Lord Krishna. Ittam vyavasito buddhya bhaktotiva janardhane visayan jaya tvakshan babuchi natilam pataha bubuje bubuje natilam pataha. Shuka Maharshi is continued, thus firmly fixing his determination by means of his spiritual intelligence. Sudhama remained absolutely devoted to Lord Krishna and Lord Krishna, the shelter of all living beings. Free from avarice, he enjoyed, together with his wife, the sense pleasures that had been bestowed upon him, always with the idea of eventually renouncing all sense gratification. तस्य वै देवदेवस्य हरे अन्यपते प्रभु ब्राह्मण प्रभुवो देवं न तेभ्यो विद्यते परम्. Lord Hari is the God of all gods, the master of all sacrifices, and the supreme ruler, but he accepts the saintly Brahmanas as his masters. So there exists no deity higher than them. Sri Vishwanatha Chakravarti Thakur points out that even though Lord Krishna is the supreme ruler of creation, he accepts the Brahmanas as his masters. Even though he is the God of all gods, the Brahmanas are his deities. And even though he is the Lord of all sacrifices, he performs sacrifices to worship them. Evam savipro bhagavat suprudatra društva स्वभत्ये रचितं पराजितं त्वद्वानवेगो गतितात्मबन्धनः स्तद्धामदेवे चरतं सतां गतिम्. एतद्ब्रह्मणदेवस्य श्रुत्वा ब्रह्मण्यतां नरः लब्धभावो भगवति कर्मबन्धाद्विमुच्यते. Thus, seeing how the unconquerable Supreme Lord Krishna is nonetheless conquered by his own servants, the Lord's dear Brahmana friend felt the remaining knots of the material attachment within his heart being cut by the force of his constant meditation on the Lord. In a short time, he attained Lord Krishna's supreme abode, the destination of great saints. Sudama's earthly fortune has been described, and now Shukadeva Goswami describes the treasure of the Brahmana. Sri Jiva Goswami mentions that Sudama's last trace of illusion lay in the subtle pride of being renounced as Brahmana. This trace was also destroyed by his contemplating Supreme Lord's submission to his devotees. Etad brahmanya devasya Shrutva brahmanyata nraha labdha bhavo bhagavati karma bandhadvimuchyate karma bandhadvimuchyate. The Lord always shows Brahmana special favor. Anyone who hears this account of the Supreme Lord's kindness to Brahmanas will come to develop love for the Lord and thus become freed from the bondage of material work. In the introduction to the chapter Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that describes the pastime, His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada comments, Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the super soul of all being, all living entities, shows that everyone's heart very well. He is especially inclined to the Brahmana devotees. Lord Krishna is also called Brahmanya Deva, which means that he is worshipped by the Brahmanas. Therefore, it is understood that a devotee who is fully surrendered unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead has already acquired the position of a Brahmana without becoming a Brahmana. One cannot approach the Supreme Brahman, Lord Krishna. Krishna is especially concerned with vanquishing the distress of his thus end the purports to the humble servants of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada to the 10th canto, 81st chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Lord Blesses Sudhama Brahmana. Iti 81st chapter is finished. That ends the 81st chapter. Iti Srimad Bhagavate Mahapurane Paramahamsam Samitayam Dashamaskande Uttararde Prutukopakhyanam Nama Ekashishtamodhyayah. Om Namostu Anantaya Sahasramurtaye Sahasrapadakshiro Bahave Sahasranamne Purushashte Sahasrakoti Yugadharane Namaha Sahasrakoti Yugadharane Namaha Akashat Paridam Medagat Sagaram Sarvadeva Namaskaraha Sri Keshvam Prigatyon Namaha Sarva Vedeshat Pundam Sarva Tirteshu Yatpalam Tatpalam Pramapti Vasanant Vasdevasya Vastante Jagatrem Sarvabhuta Nivasosi Vasdevamurtate Kayena Vacha Manasendrena Va Buddhatmana Va Prakrite Sabhavat Karomi Yaddat Sagalam Parasmai Narayana Samarpayami Narayana Samarpayami Narayana Samarpayami Hari Om Tat Sat. We finished the 81st chapter. We are going to 82nd chapter. Tomorrow, Balarama and Krishna, they meet Gopa, Gopiya. The meeting